Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us. I know it's raining, and yet our best friends are here. Thank you very much.
True believers.
The true believers, indeed. They're here to see an apostle and scholar of Korean studies, Korean unification, freedom, and human rights for all Koreans. Let me begin by thanking our co-chair emeritus, Roberta Cohen, for joining us this morning, and also our board member, Colonel Professor David Maxwell, for also joining us. Good to see so many friends. Joseph, you made it. Very nice. Of course, there is no other way. Mr. Jong, my good friend, was just arrived from Korea. He's a former political prisoner, Camp 15. Yo-Dok, he's our close friend, partner, and ally. Came to Hawaii, Global Peace Foundation, Alex, and all of you, Guido, of course, from the German Embassy. So, thank you very much, and let me begin by telling you that I'm Professor Lee's disciple. Professor Lee was my professor as soon as I arrived in the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy almost 24 years ago in 2000. He hasn't changed a bit, and he's, of course, the same terrific scholar and freedom fighter that he's always been. He taught at the Fletcher School for more than a quarter century. He's now a senior fellow with the Woodrow Wilson Center for International Scholars. At Fletcher, he was also Kim Gu Korea Professor and Chair of Korean Studies at our alma mater, and it's great to see that we do have other representatives of our alma mater in the audience as well today. It's always delightful to hear from Professor Sung-Yoon, who is a widely published author. His household name on TV stations, radio stations, and today we're here to talk to Professor Lee about his book, The Sister. As you know, we included those reviews in the invitation that you received. The book has received some very nice reviews. I try to avoid saying raving whenever I talk about a book and reviews, but extraordinarily good reviews. Highly appreciated by this community of Korea watchers. And Professor Lee, thank you so much for honoring us with your presence this morning. Everything is on the record. It's a meeting amongst friends. Please remember that we have coffee, tea, and pastries available. And otherwise, Professor Lee, the mic are yours, please.
I'm truly honored to have this opportunity to share with you some of my recent, as in over the past 3 or 4 years, gleanings on North Korea, in particular, the subject of my humble book, Kim Yo-jong, the princess, the daughter of Kim Jong-il, and of course, the younger sister of the current North Korean dictator, Kim Jong-un. Greg, thank you for this opportunity. It's always a pleasure, an intense pleasure to work with you. And as you know, HRNK is a world-leading research institute publishing scholarly reports on North Korea over the past decade or so. There have been over 60 book-length, 100 pages or more, substantive, detailed, original research reports on various aspects of North Korea's manifold crimes against humanity. So HRNK, Committee for Human Rights in North Korea, does really essential work. And I'm so pleased to have this opportunity to perhaps play a small role in a bit of fundraising. And my special thanks to my publishers, Pat Macmillan in London and Public Affairs in New York City, the US publisher, for donating over 40 books, 40 copies of The Sister for this cause today. I first came to take interest in Kim Yo-jong when I watched her at her father's wake in December 2011. Kim Jong-il died in mid-December, December 17th, and over the next several days, North Korea showcased the corpse, Kim Jong-il's dead body, in a glass coffin on an elaborate bed of flowers. And as you know, in Korean funerary rites culture, the proper way to express your profound sorrow is to really overdo it, exaggerate, wail away, almost deliriously. And with North Koreans, you have an extra incentive to show your profound sorrow and pain because people are watching you. There are cameras everywhere. There are minders watching you, whether you're mourning, grieving properly. But there stood one young woman in the traditional Korean funerary black robe with thin white running down her neckline, who stood right behind Kim Jong-un. And by then we knew who he was, the next leader. And she didn't seem to care who was watching her, whether cameras were trained on her. She looked dejected, her head tilted like this. It seemed that she had not eaten in days. Her cheeks were hollow, sunken, and she showed genuine, profound sadness. And I thought, that must be the daughter of the late North Korean dictator. And of course, Kim Il-jung made her splashy international debut when she visited South Korea for the opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics in Pyeongchang on February 9th, 2018. Her first stage entrance, if you will, on South Korean TV was when she entered the VIP reception lounge at the major airport in South Korea, in Incheon International Airport. The nominal head of the delegation, 90-year-old Kim Young-nam, actually was ushered in first before the far more important royal personage behind him. And he looked a little nervous, Kim Young-nam, looked behind him. And then she made her entrance and the cameras were whirring. She walked in, maintaining an erect carriage like this, chin up a little, and looking very comfortable, not showing any bit of excitement or happiness that she was there. She walked in as if she had walked into her own living room. And she trained her gaze across the room on the wall on just one or two spots, maybe two or three spots like this. Faint smile, but very imperious. And the Korean host, Minister of Unification, sitting across the table from the North Korean delegation, gestured to the nominal head of the North Korean delegation, Mr. Kim, to take his seat. And he demurred and said, no, you take this senior seat right across the table from the South Korean host. And she very politely, with both hands, gestured, no, you take it. And Mr. Kim said, no, you should take this seat. You're the senior most person. And she said again, quite decorously, with a nice smile, no, you take it. Viewers cooed. They said, wow, she's so polite. Not only is she pretty, but she's also so courteous. Not really. In Korean culture, the way to show true deference in this kind of gesture is to cup your hands and say gently, please, you take it. She did this. It means sit down, obey my command. But in the heat of the moment, in the excitement of the princess from Pyongyang actually being in South Korea, it seemed that people wanted to read into her presence, although she never spoke a word to the press or to the public, that peace was nigh. She was the messenger of peace and reconciliation and rapprochement and denuclearization and reunification and all those good things. In the evening, I thought the optics of the VIP box very strange. She and her fellow North Korean, Kim Young-nam, were seated above the South Korean president and the first lady, and also Vice President Mike Pence and Mrs. Pence in the royal viewing box. She was there already before President Moon made his entrance, and President Moon had to look up, extend his arm, and shake her hand. And she smiled, and she was courteous, but she maintained an erect carriage while President Moon showed great enthusiasm, lunging forward, and she maintained her right elbow right by her side. It wasn't like this. Certainly wasn't with both hands. Like this. Very arrogant, very imperious. And throughout the evening, from certain camera angles, it seemed that she was lording it over Mike Pence, seated right behind him. No, she wasn't. She was seated 2 seats over. But from certain angles, it seemed that she was right above the head of the vice president. And she maintained that Mona Lisa smirk smile with her chin up like this and smiled. And I think Vice President Pence made an unforced error. That is, when the North Korean and South Korean athletes marched in together, I think the US representative could have afforded to clap, applaud. But he maintained sort of a grimace and sat there, thus coming across as the more petulant party. I think that was a small mistake. But I was struck by this seating arrangement, and I had some questions. And later I learned that this was, of course, not an accident, that Kim Yo-jong had insisted that she be seated behind and above President Moon and Vice President Pence, or else we go back home. So accommodations were made. The next day, she visited the Blue House and brought with her a personal letter of invitation to North Korea from her brother, which seemed to further confirm this genuine cause of rapprochement, of her goodwill. And throughout her 2 nights, 3 day stay in South Korea, she was a star. She was a fascinating figure just because of her identity. A young woman, a powerful, preeminent member of the ruling dynasty. What I tried to argue in my book, although sometimes it's been misunderstood, my message, is that she is a co-crime boss. She is the number 2 official in what she says, no matter how sweet it may sound, must be questioned, cannot be accepted at face value. I believe in the next North Korean post-provocation peace ploy, charm offensive. As you know, North Korea doesn't just go berserk and escalate endlessly. They know when to scale it down and resort to this dramatic charm offensive, changing its tune from molto agitato to a happy placido. In that next North Korean diplomatic outreach, I believe she will be the face of it. And because of her gender, a young, pretty, powerful woman, I fear there will be traps. Her path will be strewn with traps. That is, because of a pervasive tendency on the part of many men, not all, of course, and I might say boldly some women too, to patronize, to underestimate smart young women, thinking that she is malleable, thinking that by virtue of your own intelligence and charisma that you can mold her, you can teach her a lesson. People will want to believe in her message and perhaps even share the credit that she wants peace and denuclearization. Don't trust her. Don't believe everything she says. Don't patronize her. She is not to be underestimated. And the emergence of this kind of preeminent female figure in North Korean history is unprecedented. Yes, Kim Kyung-hee, Kim Jong-il's younger sister, enjoyed great influence. Yes, Kim Sung-hye, Kim Il-sung's second or probably third wife, with whom Kim Il-sung fathered 4 children. Yes, she was building her own cult of personality, imitating Madame Mao in China in the 1960s, but it was short-lived. No other North Korean ruling member female person has issued ever a written statement under her own name, whereas Kim Yo-jong has now more than 40 since her very first statement on March 3rd, 2020. Why in early 2020? I don't think it's a coincidence. The onset of COVID prompted Kim Jong-un to take action, to elevate his sister, who's already very powerful, of course, having attended every single summit meeting by her brother, except Kim's first meeting with Vladimir Putin on April 25th, 2019 in Vladivostok. But COVID was an unprecedented mortal threat to the North Korean supreme leader. We know there has never been any large-scale or even small-scale protest worthy of the name in North Korea that we know of. We know that despite North Korea frequently trumping up, playing up this paranoia of an imminent US attack, In fact, since 1953, since the armistice, there has never been a US attack on North Korea. So internal threat, external threat to the supreme leader have been manageable, not really existent. Yet, COVID was different. We know that COVID can kill both princes and paupers alike. Of course, people who have access to power and wealth have greater access to healthcare and so on, information. But we've seen celebrities, even heads of state, come close to death in the COVID era. This was a mortal threat to Kim Jong-un. And who better than his trusted, very capable sister to take over in the event Kim Jong-un becomes incapacitated? Repeatedly, Kim Yo-jong, through her statements, has said that her authority to implement policy is derived from the comrade chairman, the party, and the state. That's what she said for the first time in her June 13th, 2020 written statement, in which she said this ugly, hideous, useless North-South joint liaison building will be gone soon. And 3 days later, demolished it was. It was quite theatrical, around 2:50 p.m. on June 16th, and North Korea showed it right away, just hours later on TV. In broad daylight, this 4-story building detonated, crumbling. You could see the plumes of smoke, you could almost smell it, you could certainly hear it, the detonation. It was theatrical, and it was to instill concern in their adversary in South Korea. Kim Yo-jong also, in that statement of June 13th, threatened to move troops into the border region. And then very cleverly, 12 days later, Kim Jong-un said, for now, we will suspend that plan. We'll sit on that plan. Thus doing a very clever role switchover. Kim Jong-un was still the bad cop, but whereas she had been the good cop to her brother in 2018, now she was playing the role of the even worse cop. So when she reverts to a charming, young, polite woman role, it will be easier to forgive and forget all her potty-mouthed invective against President Biden, President Yoon, President Moon, and so on. Why? Because she's a young woman. It will be easier to stomach insults from her and to forget that she was so rude for so long because she is not a surly-looking male dictator, but a photogenic, young, pretty woman. This is a major, unprecedented diplomatic weapon. She is a weapon to the North Korean regime. Unfortunately, I see in her eyes a sparkle, intelligence. I saw that in Kim Jong-il too, and Kim Il-sung, the state founder. They were intelligent. They were not crazy in the conventional sense of the word. I don't see that sparkle in Kim Jong-un. And indeed, we know that he was not a good student when the children lived in Switzerland between 1996 and 2000. Kim Yo-jong was, she speaks English. He doesn't speak a word of English. He hardly went to school. And when he did, he played basketball. He was into computer games like many other kids his age, but he was not a studious person. So I think she is really the brains. She is really the mastermind in this family campaign to expand their influence over South Korea and beyond. And I think the recent frequent showcasing of Kim Jong-un's daughter in public since November of 2022, this is the product, the work of Kim Yo-jong. Many South Korean experts have suggested that the frequent showcasing, parading around of the cute little girl must be the outcome of some tension, a fraught relationship between Kim Jong-un's wife and his sister. And yes, in many cultures around the world, it can be a testy relationship. But you see, North Korea is a medieval-style, absolutist dynasty. It's a monarchy. And in such a political culture, the king cannot be challenged, even by his very influential wife. The wives put up with the harem, philandering ways of the king or the emperor. You have to just grit your teeth and accept it. That's how it was with Chairman Mao. That's how it was with Kim Jong-il. Kim Il-sung, and many powerful men around the world throughout history. There is no evidence, for example, that any of Kim Jong-un's many wives and mistresses ever leaned on their beau, Kim Jong-il, and said, you know, Kyung-hee, your little sister, she's too loudmouth. Rein her in, teach her a lesson. There is no evidence of that. In fact, there's some evidence to the contrary. Kim Kyung-hee was powerful enough to tell off Kim Jong-il's wives. So, if I'm Kim Yo-jong, oh, pardon me, I'm not. Kim Yo-jong, I believe, is very smart. And if she were smart, she would, as her nation's chief propagandist, having run the Department of Propaganda and Agitation since 2012, officially since 2014, but she's been in charge since 2012, she would, of course, tell her brother to parade around his daughter, which would presumably please him, please his wife, and which would further strengthen her already very powerful position in the hierarchy. What is the intention? Well, you know, this wholesome family ensemble, father-daughter loving relationship, it softens up the brutish image of the North Korean dictatorship. What does that achieve? Perhaps with repetition, Americans will one day come to take the view, you know, he's a cruel dictator, but he's obviously not crazy and loves his family, loves his daughter. He wouldn't start a nuclear war. Maybe, just maybe, we'll just have to learn to live with a nuclear North Korea. That is one intention, I believe, in this game of psychological manipulation by showcasing this prepubescent little girl. Another message clearly is, you know, a bit of gloating, great leader gloating. Our nukes are here to stay. Mr. Biden, Mr. Trump, you'll be gone in 5 or 6 years. I'm here to stay. Power, nukes will be handed down to the next generation. We have time, all the time in the world. You don't. So there are many gains, many benefits to be gained in showcasing this little girl. And I think Kim Yo-jong is really the steward, the guardian, and she has all the more to gain for the foreseeable future for the next 10, 15 years until Kim Jong-un's little daughter comes of age. And when she's in her mid-20s and comes to view her auntie as expendable, cumbersome, or even expendable, who knows what will happen? Who knows who will strike first? But I believe Kim Yo-jong will not forget memories of that nipping, wrathful winter of 2013 when she and her brother had their uncle, Chang Song-taek, humiliated, tortured, and killed. She will remember that. So who knows what the future holds. But for now, Kim Yo-jong, I believe, is the only viable candidate of that Mount Baekdu bloodline, so-called, as a descendant, direct line descendant of state founder Kim Il-sung, who is capable and who can assume the throne in the event that Kim Jong-un becomes gravely ill. And in my humble estimation, as a woman, she will probably have more to prove as the first female supreme leader of her nation, and things will not get any better under Kim Yo-jong than they have been, horribly as we know, under her brother. Thank you.
Well, you, Professor Lee, thank you very much. Truly fascinating. Once again, great to see all of you. I wish to thank those of we're grateful to Professor Lee and his publisher. All book purchases will go to HRNK. It's a good cause, finding out and telling the truth about North Korean human rights. That said, let's move on to the Q&A if you're ready with questions. Colonel Maxwell, HRNK board member.
Thank you, Professor Lee. Your remarks were insightful and obviously really support your research in your book. And so my question is, if you were advising President Yoon, President Biden, or any policymakers, how should they deal with Kim Yo-jong? How should South Korea and the United States approach the regime knowing, Kim Yo-jong as you've described her, what is the best way to really counter their information warfare, their political warfare, and Kim Yo-jong specifically being the brains of the regime? Thank you.
Thank you, Colonel David Maxwell, leading expert on North Korea and a champion of advancing the cause of human rights in North Korea for so long. If I were to advise the Yoon administration, I would stress the following. Tell the people, especially the younger generation of South Koreans, the following glaring fact. North Korea is the only industrialized, urbanized, literate country in peacetime, no war, to have undergone a famine, and for every single year since the end of the famine around 1999, to have suffered one of the world's most serious food insecurity situations. Every year, the United Nations publishes a major report, the state of food insecurity and nutrition around the world. And of course, the UN does not put together a top 10 worst list or top 20, but it's very easy to put one together yourself, just looking at the basic statistics. Prevalence of undernourishment in the total population. Prevalence of undernourishment in the total population. What does that mean? It means what percent of your total population suffers from chronic hunger, not just over a day or two, having skipped a meal or two, or by choice going on a diet, but chronic hunger malaise. Each year, for over the past 5 or 6 years, North Korea has been in the top 5 in the world. This year, or 2023, the worst case is Madagascar, with 51% of the population hungry. Next are Somalia and the Central African Republic, with 49% of the population. Then in a virtual tie, it's North Korea and another small African nation. And you go down the list, you see Haiti, you see Zambia, you see Afghanistan. One striking, glaring reality is all of these nations, except for the DPRK, have a relatively high level of adult illiteracy, conventionally defined as the inability to write your own name, to read a simple sentence as an adult. North Korea eradicated illiteracy before South Korea did. North Korea lived better. North Korea was richer than South Korea until about 1973, and then it took a giant leap backward. The simple fact is, why are people, say, in Niger, where adult illiteracy is as high as 84% and over 90% among the female population, why are people in Chad with over 50% adult illiteracy? Why are people in Afghanistan with over 50% adult illiteracy eating better than people in North Korea every year over the past 3 decades? How do we explain this? Oh, well, because of US sanctions, UN sanctions, climate change? I don't think so. As we know, there were no UN sanctions, no UN Council resolutions on North Korea until North Korea's first ever nuclear test on October 9th, 2006, and then Resolution 1718, the first tough UN sanctions resolution, came into being. As for US sanctions, as we know, there were no real tough US sanctions on North Korea until the emergence of the first ever North Korea-specific sanctions bill in February 2016. Basically, it was no trade under the 1917 Trading with the Enemy Act. But no problem, North Korea had plenty of other trading partners, as we saw with Cuba too. You could find Cuban cigars in South Korea in the 1980s and 1990s. So my point is, UN sanctions were non-existent until 2006. US sanctions were non-existent until really 2016, except for one small diversion, one small exception in 2005, the designation of Banco Delta Asia as a primary money laundering concern in September 2005. And then how do we explain this chronic hunger? The famine took place, over a decade before the advent of the first ever UN sanctions on North Korea. 20 years before the first ever US specific sanctions legislation. And how do you explain that every year without fail again, that North Korea is in the world's top 5 most hungry nations for an industrialized, literate economy? It's man-made, it's man-sustained. And as the monumental UN Commission of Inquiry report on human rights in North Korea, published in February 2014, alleges, North Korea is guilty at the highest level of state of, quote, deliberate mass starvation, end quote. That phrase, deliberate mass starvation, appears in over a dozen pages in the full report. Then there's the phrase that North Korea is guilty of, quote, knowingly causing prolonged starvation. Knowingly causing prolonged starvation. That phrase appears in footnote 76 of the short version, about 30 pages long. These are serious allegations. And there is no other way to explain this chronic hunger situation than that beyond negligence, beyond apathy, the North Korean regime sees it to be in its interest to keep a big segment of the population in a constant state of malaise and hunger. It's hard to really explain that, but there is no other rational explanation. Climate change? Well, how come climate change every year miraculously stops right at the border with China and with South Korea, where hardly anyone ever goes to bed hungry? If Kim Jong-un made a decision to spend a tiny portion of his vast wealth, let's say $400 million, which is a lot of money for an individual perhaps, but not so much, not even for North Korea. North Korea's annual luxury goods import budget is over $650 million, $700 million a year. So if Kim Jong-un spent about $300 to $400 million a year with which to import grain and distributed it equitably, not a single man, woman, child in North Korea would go to bed hungry. He chooses not to. And it's a miracle that since about 2016, the UN estimate of the food gap in North Korea each year was 1.36 million tons. And in those days, the price of corn was much cheaper than what it is now, about $147 per ton. And if you multiply 147 with 1.36 million, you get a magic number. It's $200 million. All Kim Jong-un had to do was spend $200 million with which to buy food, and he chose not to. It's almost as if North Korean planners leave aside this constant food gap for the outside world to fill in. So, it's a cruel regime that intentionally starves its people, its highly educated, disciplined, literate population. And this horrible story needs to be told to the North Korean people, to the South Korean people, and beyond, to the world at large.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kenji Sawai.
So, Kim Il-sung is, of course, emphasizing so back to Hyoton, so that's a lineage. But on the other hand, her mother, Ko Young-hee, came from Japan, Korean Japanese descendant. So, of the psychological weapon, she is strong. But on the other hand, her lineage, so Korean Japanese basically discriminated in North Korea. So how, if the fact was revealed in North Korean so top group or people, how will be so happen?
There are 3 state secrets that must be kept under lids, that must be kept still a secret from the regime's point of view. Not necessarily because the people will rise up against the regime right away, but because it will become more complex to implement the next parent to child succession. Let me try to explain. Kenji mentioned the fact that Kim Jong-un's mother, Kim Il-sung's mother, is a Japan-born, Osaka-born ethnic Korean, Ko Yong-hee. What's the problem there? Well, we know that in the late 50s, Japan promoted the mass exodus, repatriation of ethnic Koreans, and North Korea, of course, beckoned with a mirage of a luxurious life to be had once you came over to North Korea. So almost 100,000 people chose to move, relocate from Japan to North Korea. Why North Korea, not South? Because North Korea was richer. That's one reason back then. And these people were exploited, sent to gulags, political prisoner concentration camps, and certainly their progeny, their offspring, were branded in the lowest class among the hostile class, every newborn as a predetermined political class, and this is hereditary. So it's ironical that Ko Yong-hee, had she not had the rare opportunity to be seen and dance in front of the North Korean supreme leader-to-be, Kim Jong-il, in the late 1960s, she and certainly her own children would have had a life of deprivation, hardship, extreme oppression. The exact opposite of what her children, Jong-chul, Jong-un, and Jong have had, a life of nothing but extreme luxury and pampering. Another state secret that must be kept secret is that Kim Il-sung, the original great leader, so-called, played the church organ. He went to church as a boy, and his mother was a church deaconess. His father attended an American missionary established school. It's a Christian family. That fact, that inconvenient fact, must also not be disclosed. Why? Not because that will, foster a rebellion and uprising necessarily, but it would dent the legitimacy of this great, omnipotent, powerful family, who by virtue of lineage, through whose veins run the blood of the original great leader who purportedly single-handedly liberated Korea in the North Korean historiography. There is no mention of the United States, the Pacific War. There is no mention of the atomic bombings. There is no mention of other allies. Scant mention of the Soviet Union in the last phase of the war in August 1945. Kim Il-sung basically single-handedly defeated Imperial Japan in North Korean history. The third inconvenient fact that should not be disclosed when it comes to the North Korean family, and especially this family, Kim Jong-un, is that Ko Yong-hee, Kim Jong-un's mom's sister, Ko Yong-suk, and her husband and their children defected. To where? To the principal enemy of North Korea, as Kim Jong-un said at the 8th Party Congress on his birthday on January 8th, 2021, the United States. This would mar the legacy, the legitimacy of the next North Korean leader. So North Korea goes to great lengths to keep secret these inconvenient truths, while trumping up, highly exaggerating, blatantly lying about the exploits, the heroic feats of Kim Il-sung. With time, it becomes more challenging to deify, to manufacture heroic feats with the third generation, Kim Jong-un, with the next generation. So North Korea's propagandists have a lot of work to do. But again, these are inconvenient truths that North Korea goes to great length to keep hidden.
We'll go to our co-chair emeritus, Roberta Cohen. Roberta, please wait for the mic.
I wanted to ask you, and thank you for such a fascinating presentation. I wanted to ask you about the society's attitudes toward women. I mean, you mentioned that a woman would have to prove herself more, but then you read, oh, there could never be a woman leader of North Korea. You're suggesting that there can be, and it might be one of these two, and even that there might be some sort of Shakespearean tragic dynastic rivalry at a later time when the daughter grows up. I wonder if you can comment, though, on how prepared the society is to have a woman as a leader. I mean, obviously coming from this same bloodline that they're trying to maintain, and what that takes to do that, and whether they're doing things to try to change the general image, and does that also affect how women generally are treated within North Korea? I mean, the market women, many have written about, and this has made a big change. But there's also been so many restrictions and exploitation of these women. What do you see is happening with this issue, plus then how women are seen and treated in the country?
Thank you. We know that Kim Jong-un, very early in his reign, disclosed to the public his rather stylish wife, Lee Sol-ju, at an evening concert in July 2012, by name then. A few days before that, she accompanied Kim Jong-un at an renovated opening of an amusement park, where Chang Song-taek and Kim Kyung-hee also attended. So that prompted many North Korea watchers to prognosticate optimistically that maybe this leader is different from his dad, who seldom liked to be seen with his wife or mistress until the very last stage of his life, when he brought with him Kim Ok, his last mistress, to China. We also remember that by virtue of Kim Jong-un having gone to school in Switzerland, people wanted to imagine that he would be a reformer, having been exposed to European cosmopolitanism. And sir, I lived in Europe. I love Europe. I have nothing against European cosmopolitanism, but it's very shaky. It's a shaky basis. The model here, false model, is Deng Xiaoping, who, unlike his predecessor Mao, who never traveled abroad until he did, making a trip to the Soviet Union, to Moscow in late 1949 to meet with Stalin. Unlike Mao, Deng had benefited from education at a young age in France. In his 20s, he lived in France for about 4 years. Well, if European cosmopolitanism were the answer, how does one explain Pol Pot, who also lived in France, studied in France for 4 years as a young man? How do you explain the current Syrian dictator, who's an eye doctor, ophthalmologist, studied in England, yet he has managed to kill hundreds of thousands of his own people? So it was a shaky basis to making projections that were very optimistic. Likewise, I find today the fact that Kim Jong-un does surround himself with powerful women, like his wife, like his sister, Hyun Song-wol, Choi Sun-hee, the female foreign minister, because we do see some prominent, powerful female leaders in Kim Jong-un's entourage. Maybe it is feminist inclined. Maybe Kim Jong-un wants to bring gender equality to this very male-dominated, patriarchal, male chauvinistic society that is North Korea. I think it's a bit premature to make that kind of projection. The evidence is very thin. And as Ms. Cohen mentioned, we have seen North Korean women bear the brunt of being the primary breadwinner since the onset of the famine, working hard in the marketplace, and of course doing household chores like cooking and cleaning, while the men sort of lounge around. And this is all, of course, a function of traditional Confucian culture, where men are revered, honored over women, even your mother. The wife is a quasi-permanent outsider in the Confucian family norm. So North Korea remains a very male-dominated, male-chauvinistic society. And then Out of this unpromising environment has emerged a powerful, preeminent female leader. It's an anomaly. It's unprecedented. And what is my basis for projecting that she, Kim Yo-jong, might one day inherit her kingdom if necessary? Can we actually envision, can the North Korean people accept a female supreme leader? Well, many North Korean defectors say, no way, it just can't happen. It's jarring. But in my humble estimation, what actually supersedes such cultural biases is that power must remain in the family. That is, you cannot have a non-Kim of the royal lineage. You cannot have a Park or a Lee emerge as the supreme leader, no matter how talented you are, how qualified you are. And Kim Yo-jong, again, for the next 15 years or so, is the only viable candidate, having proven her capabilities of the so-called Mount Baekdu bloodline. I've watched with some exaggeration, possibly 500 hours of North Korean video footage. And please, for the record, I'm not pro-North Korea. I know in South Korea this is a problem. But anyway, I've had access to North Korean documents and video. And she's different, Kim Yo-jong. She occupies a unique position. We all recall that one of the formal accusations made against Kang Sung-taek was, quote, half-heartedly clapping after Kim Jong-un's speech. Not making this up, you can look it up, half-heartedly clapping. And I could tell in photographs, Kang Sung-taek had grown complacent and arrogant in those days. He would sometimes be seen with folded arms, standing beside his nephew, the great leader. So he had it coming, I thought, at the time. Kim Yo-jong not only claps half-heartedly after her brother's speech, sometimes like this. While everyone else in the room, whether it's 500 people or 5,000 people, are just going rapturously, sometimes she doesn't clap at all. There's a photograph issued by the Korean Central News Agency on February 8th or 9th at a banquet when we saw Kim Jong-un's daughter walk in with her father and the mother a step or two behind on the red carpet. All the principals were there, Choi Sun-hee, Jo Young-won, and they're all, applauding the entrance of the great leader very vigorously. There stands one person in a white jacket, black skirt, Kim Yo-jong, arms down by her side. And they released it. Why? Well, she runs the propaganda and agitation department. So there's no one else like that. Lack of deference to the supreme leader. He lets her get away with that. After the banquet at Panmunjom, following the first ever inter-Korean summit between Kim Jong-un and Korean leader Moon Jae-in on April 27th, 2018, there was an outdoor concert. Kim Jong-un brought a magician from North Korea, and his highlight magic act was taking a 500,000 Korean won, about $50 a bit less, and then converting that into a super note, a $100 bill. And everyone applauded, and I thought it was sick. They systematically counterfeit US $100 bills. And here is Kim Jong-un entertaining his South Korean hosts by doing this magic act, and everyone's applauding. Kim Yo-jong is just laughing uncontrollably. The final event was an outdoor concert before Kim Jong-un drove away to Pyongyang. And everyone is seated on a makeshift bench with 5 rows or so. Kim Jong-un and his wife, President Moon and his wife, and all the officials. The last person to exit the building and make their way toward this ensemble is none other than Kim Yo-jong. Not a care in the world. In Korean culture, if you're tardy, if you're running behind, and especially if you're a junior, you sort of pretend to rush or even run. You often see people running around in government facilities in South Korea too. She's walking casually. No North Korean dares lay their eyes on her. No one looks at her. No one gives her a dirty look, not even Kim Jong-un. And she just takes her seat at the end of the front row, very casually. Who else in North Korea can do that? At an event where the supreme leader is the star and just casually walk up late? No one. When I see her in Singapore, at the hotel before the first ever summit with the US President, Donald Trump, on June 12th, the previous day, Kim Jong-un is sitting back in his chair in his hotel suite, giving instructions, exaggerated mannerism, hand gestures, while everyone stands stiff at attention. Kim Jong-un is walking in and out of the frame, whistling. She doesn't care. She can get away with that. I see genuine brotherly and sisterly affection and trust in the two siblings. They often steal glimpses of one another, with each other. At a major event like a summit meeting, they look at each other and then kind of nod, smile, throughout the day. So I really do think Kim Jong-un, completely trusts and depends even on his smart sister. And I would think that her standing, Kim Il-jung's position in the hierarchy for now and for the foreseeable future is quite solid.
Great. Yoon, I do have a question of my own. To make a long question short, is Kim Jong-un playing with fire? He's in the business of running a dynasty. Fratricide and iconoclasm are very serious matters. Of course, you say this in the book. He had his own half-brother killed with a weapon of mass destruction via exudate gas in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, at the airport. Fratricide, check. Okay, he blew up the Yolak Samuso, the liaison office. Okay, the South Koreans built it, no problem. However, the arch of unification is a different matter. That's a symbol directly related to Kim Il-sungism. Moreover, he goes ahead and states that the two Koreas are no longer the same Minjok, the same nation, but two enemy nations, basically. Of course, we all say with the same mind that nothing has changed. It has always been the intention of the Kim family regime to subvert, undermine South Korea, even take over by force if presented with the opportunity. But in Kim Il-sungism and Kim Il-sung thought, which continues to provide the very justification for the Kim family dynasty, there are no free elections after all, nationalism is a big deal. Actually, patriotism. To Kim Il-sung, 애국주의's patriotism is positive nationalism, while 민족주의 is negative nationalism of the kind that oppresses minorities. That's pretty much what the Kim family regime does to their own people. He justifies whatever is done in North Korea based on patriotism, this type of quasi-post-colonial liberation ideology. But again, by denying that, we know that nothing has changed. By blowing up the arch of unification, of course, we know that nothing has changed. But those North Korean people who have to take the Senghwa Chonghwa ideological training sessions at least once a week, those North Korean people have been learning Kim Il-sung thought with the People's Democratic Federation of Korea at the very center of Kim Il-sung's approach to unification. Do you think they will be confused? Do you think this somehow undermines the ideological underpinnings of the Kim family regime? So is he playing with fire? Or does he just have a bad temper?
Again, I see Kim Il-jung all over this. She issued a written statement in July last year, 2023, and for the first time used the term 대한민국, Republic of Korea, but in quotation marks, North Korean style quotation marks, so-called Republic of Korea. That's what it meant with quotation marks. I often write the DPRK and then explain the Despotic People's Republic of Korea, the so-called DPRK, in jest. That's what she was doing. It was a snide remark. And this led to a flurry of an outpouring of unfounded interpretations in South Korea, especially that now North Korea was finally paying due respect to South Korea and treating South Korea better, referring to it as not puppet, or southern Joseon, southern part of North Korea, but by the formal name. It was unfounded. Kim Il-sung often makes fun of South Korean leaders and South Korea itself, and often refers to South Korea as a puppet, a stooge of the United States, and the so-called Republic of Korea is acting up what a sight to behold. That was the tone of her reference. I think the reaction by South Korea, some expressing concern at the time last July, that maybe now North Korea is saying that South Korea is a separate nation, separate entity, not a partner to be reconciled with. Maybe this is an ominous development. That's what some people said, in addition to others taking the view that now North Korea is showing proper respect. I think Kim Il-sung took that as an opportunity to ratchet things up. Now, having her brother say that the Republic of Korea is not a partner, potential partner for reunification, but a primary enemy to be subdued and to be incorporated into the territory of the DPRK. It does ratchet things up. It does instill growing greater concern in Seoul, and with Kim Jong-un threatening even nuclear war against South Korea. But as you implied, Greg, it doesn't change anything. The rhetoric is different. But did North Korea sincerely espouse the notion of a peaceful merger with a richer Korean state across the border, an equitable merger? Or did North Korea, under the rubric of sweet-sounding reconciliation and reunification and reminjokiri by the Korean nation ourselves and so on, have other schemes in its mind to use force if necessary to subdue the South? I think the latter. And now they're just saying it more blatantly, more forcefully. So I don't think it really changes the equation. I don't think North Korea has radically revised its state goals of absorbing, taking over South Korea. And I think the blowing up of the reunification arch, like the blowing up of the North-South liaison tower back in 2020, like the blowing up of the Mount Kumgang facilities built with entirely South Korean funds, it's a form of psychological pressure, political warfare, raising the stakes, trying to make South Koreans worry, and perhaps on the eve of general elections in South Korea in April and US elections later in the year, maybe North Korea is trying to foment anti-US, anti-Yoon administration sentiment for bringing us to the brink of war. By playing tough with North Korea, President Yoon has brought this on himself, that North Korea is now totally uninterested in reconciliation and reunification, as if it really happened even while Kim Jong-un was beaming smiles and shaking hands with President Moon, and before that, his father shaking hands with President Roh Moo-hyun or with President Kim Dae-jung in the first ever Inter-Korean summit in June 2000. By the time of the Panmunjom summit between Kim and Moon, for me it was like watching Rambo 4. The first Rambo movie, First Blood, was a good movie, but by the time you've seen Rambo 4, you have a pretty good idea how the movie ends. And I was on a live radio program, the BBC, with another commentator who was very optimistic, said people are in tears, thousands of reporters at the Kintex Convention Center in Ilsan. We're watching all this on the giant screen, many are crying, and you can see on YouTube, yes, indeed, many people crying. And, I was kind of sullen, and the moderator grew a bit unhappy and said, "What's wrong with you?" to me. And I said, "This is Rambo 4. Why are you so cynical?" "Well, when you've been repeatedly mocked by the duo tag team of reality and history, one does grow a bit skeptical." I didn't have the time to explain, but Rambo 1 was not Kim Jong-un meeting with Kim Dae-jung, but Kim Il-sung. In 1972, when the geopolitical shift took place with Nixon's visit to China in February 1972, the client states were freaking out. Japan, South Korea, Taiwan. China now abandon us. Will the US now abandon us? So what did Kim Il-sung do? Retreat into a cocoon? No. He came out smiling, invited several Americans to his office for the first time. 2 reporters from the New York Times on May 26th, 1972, Harrison Salisbury, a very famous, seasoned veteran New York Times reporter, former head of the bureau in Moscow, and John Lee, who was the then bureau chief in Tokyo, and talked with him for 3 hours. And the 2 reporters came away with the view that we will see replayed over and over again with anyone who has ever met with the North Korean Supreme Leader. Wow, not only is he not crazy, but he's very smart, very well informed, quite reasonable. Wow, he knows a lot about me. He knows a lot about the United States. I see this as the product of intense patronization of the crazy-looking dictator. And you are impressed that by perhaps virtue of your own intelligence and charisma, you are able to make a bond with this North Korean cruel dictator. The next month, you had Celia Harrison of the Washington Post meet with Kim Il-sung, then a Harvard Law School professor, Jerome Cohen in July, dozens of Japanese reporters and so on. And the net effect was Kim Il-sung is not only not crazy, but he's visionary. We can do business with him. He told the New York Times reporters, we have to strike this anti-US stance. You understand, right? I mean, Americans killed a lot of Koreans in the war. I mean, we have to say we hate Yankees. You understand, right? I'm willing to meet with Park Chung-hee of South Korea without preconditions. I mean, US troops will have to leave eventually, but that will not be a precondition. I'm ready to meet with him if he wants to, thus coming across as a reasonable chap, a reasonable leader with whom we can do business. Rambo 2 was the June 2000 summit when Kim Jong-il made his splashy international debut, greeting the South Korean president at the airport, both hands, holding both hands, walking a half step behind the much older South Korean president who had a limp. He came across as a very polite, reasonable chap. Of course, we later learned that the South had illegally transferred $450 million US dollars in cash, literally in the days leading up to that visit. But Kim Jong-il effected a dramatic image makeover. And then again, in October 2007, with South Korean President Roh Moo-hyun's visit to North Korea. He was smiling. He said, I hear you have to actually fly to Pyongyang and then fly to Mount Baekdu if you really want to visit. Let's do a direct flight from Seoul to Mount Baekdu, Samjiyon. And the South Koreans were floored. They were like giddy. That never happened, of course. So the North Korean great leader not only knows how to do calculated provocations, but they also are very adept at psychological manipulation and coming across as a reasonable fellow. Kim Jong-un, 2018. There will be a replay of this charm offensive. And again, I think Kim Il-sung will have a major role in the next post-provocation peace ploy.
Thank you very much. More questions from the audience? Please, Alex.
Hi, and thank you again for all of these great insights. I'm curious about your thoughts on, with the border opening up again, do you anticipate that Kim Yo-jong would be perhaps sent abroad again on more of these sort of charm offensive trips, similar to her presence at the Olympics? And if so, where do you think she might end up being deployed for that purpose, or what that might look like in the sort of years to come?
Thank you. Well, this May 4th, 2024, will mark the 5th anniversary of North Korea's provocation phase. That is, on May 4th, 2019, North Korea, for the first time in 18 months, resumed its ballistic missile tests. North Korea had suspended all missile tests as of the third ICBM launch in late November 2017. So I think it's to be expected that throughout much, if not all, of 2024, North Korea will march down, continue its relentless march of provocations, verbal nuclear threats, hypersonic missiles, ballistic missiles, perhaps another nuclear test, and so on. Why? Because whereas an elite athlete enhances their net value by elite performance on the field or in the arena and so on, North Korea, a country like North Korea, hyper-militarized, rogue, pariah state that is North Korea, increases its net worth, its leverage by exporting insecurity, by causing problems, security threats for its neighbors. So that whoever is in the White House as of next January, remembering the tense situation throughout 2024 and going back further, 2023 and so on, will be even more inclined to say yes to the next outreach by North Korea. Thinking that dialogue is better, and of course fundamentally it is. Forgetting that North Korea launches charm offensives not with a view toward parting ways with their nukes, but buying more time and money with which to build bigger bombs, money in the form of loose sanctions enforcement and time. There will be a greater impulse to make bigger concessions, no matter how little North Korea dangles. And when this message of peace and coexistence is carried by a young, pretty North Korean princess, all the more tantalizing it will be, the message will be. And if there were to be an American leader who says, no, thank you, we're not interested in talking with you, that leader will be cast as the more petulant party. It will be virtually impossible for any US president to turn their back on this sweet-sounding message of peace carried by Kim Yo-jong. So, advantage North Korea, I feel. She was seen she was in the entourage of Kim Jong-un's visit to the Russian Far East in mid-September when he met with Vladimir Putin for the second time. And she resumed her traditional role of bringing out the fancy Montblanc fountain pen for her brother to sign guest book and so on. And she looked very much at ease in her traditional role. So yeah, she has a bigger role to play in the next North Korean fake charm offensive.
You mentioned this in the book, and you mentioned it a few minutes ago. Kim Yo-jong sits at the very top of the chain of command and control and command, as Bob Collins had put it, responsible for grave human rights violations, crimes against humanity. After all, the PAD is in charge of restricting information coming in from the outside world and indoctrinating the people of North Korea. This coming February 7th is the 10th anniversary of the publication of the report of the UN Commission of Inquiry on Human Rights in the DPRK. I was hoping you'd share a few thoughts with us on the first decade since the UN COI report and the way forward. We seem to be seeing some very positive signs in South Korea, here in the United States, in the European Union. But what is your assessment of the level of implementation of the recommendations of the UN COI report? Where do we go from here? How do we continue to rebuild momentum on North Korean human rights?
Well, here in this room are the real experts, you and Roberta and others, who know far more about this very important subject than I do. But as Ms. Cohen mentioned at a very meaningful event here at HRNK last November 30th, Judge Michael Kirby sees the section of the report on the violation of the right to food and other related aspects of the right to life as very well put together, as very meaningful. So do I. Pages 144 to 208, about 60 pages of very detailed, well-chronicled, footnoted, well-researched argument and serious allegations of North Korea's systematic deprivation of the people's right to eat. I think in democracies, certainly I speak for myself, but here in this room, I doubt there is anyone who has been a past victim of sustained systematic crime against humanity by the state, like constant surveillance, unlawful arrest and torture, experience as a political prisoner. So North Korea's manifold crimes against humanity, murder, extermination, disappearance of person, attacks against political, ethnic, gender identity, and so on, all these are somewhat abstract. It takes extra effort, greater intellectual participation, exploration to be able to empathize with these heinous, serious crimes against humanity. Whereas, I think all of us, at one point or another, we have been hungry by choice or circumstance for a few seconds, maybe a few days. We know it's not a very pleasant feeling being hungry. So again, as I asserted in response to Colonel Maxwell's question, we have to highlight this heinous, deliberate policy of mass starvation. It's inhumane, of course, as other crimes against humanity committed by the North Korean state are, but it is identifiable. We can relate to it, most of us. And it's a very unpleasant situation that people would be hungry, have carried hunger pangs for not a day or two, but 365 days a year. This, again, situation can be alleviated. It can be remedied if Kim Jong-un spent $200 or $300 million with which to import food, but he chooses not to. So the UN Commission of Inquiry report is a monumental document. It's the most well-crafted, legal study of North Korea's crimes against humanity in any language, as far as I can tell. It must be read, it must be propagated, it must be remembered, and especially the section on North Korea's policy, inhumane policy of, again, knowingly causing prolonged starvation, end quote. That has to be emphasized repeatedly throughout the world. The report alleges that the nature, scale, and gravity of North Korea's crimes against humanity reveal a state that does not have any parallel in the contemporary world. It's a shocking statement, artfully put together, designed, with clear evidence. It's a shocking revelation, reaffirmation of what you and many others have known for decades, but it makes a persuasive legal argument. The message needs to be told widely.
Thank you very much. Any more questions from the audience? Yes, please go ahead.
Regarding the DPRK's launching of its first spy satellite this year, what changes do you think will be most prominent in terms of capabilities going forward in North-South relations should hostilities come to the brink?
I know virtually nothing about military technology, I'm afraid. Many experts have opined that by virtue of Kim and Putin, their meeting and Putin's very public pledge announcement that he will help North Korea launch a satellite, a military satellite in the future, many people have drew the conclusion that Russia must be the pivotal factor in North Korea's first ever successful launch of a military satellite. I'm not sure, but I think it's about time North Korea got it right. I'm not sure how technically adept, sophisticated it is. The South Korean government says it's not. So it might take some time, but I don't think that whether the satellite capability that North Korea currently has is really threatening or not, I don't think that's the pivotal, the most relevant factor. The fact that North Korea can wreak havoc on South Korea with conventional weapons alone, the fact that, ominously, that North Korea and Russia are accelerating their military cooperation beyond the question of how well do North Korean artillery shells work on the battlefield in Ukraine, which is a relevant question, of course, but the fact that they're doing this brazenly, with South Korea claiming over 1 million shells have been transferred from North Korea to Russia in thousands of containers, and the Biden administration also affirming such transfers. This creates gnawing uncertainty, GNAW. This creates long-term insecurity, concerns, anxiety in Washington and in other capitals. So Kim Yo-jong, in a January 27th, 2023 statement, for the first time, struck her nation's official position on Russia's war in Ukraine, saying that the DPRK will forever stand in the same trenches with the heroic military and people of Russia. And they've become more brazen, of course, in recent months. So it's a troubling development, the fact that the Russian foreign minister just yesterday at the UN laid the blame for the current escalation of tension in the region on the United States, South Korea, and Japan. The fact that Russia and North Korea are so unabashedly, so brazenly violating Security Council resolutions, all of them that Putin had endorsed before, and are accelerating military cooperation. The question becomes, where does this all end? Will Russia give North Korea sensitive technology on submarine-launched ballistic missiles, nuclear-powered submarines, beyond military satellites? We don't know yet, but we know that Russia has in the past given North Korea much support with North Korea's ballistic missile programs, with Russian scientists and technicians, dozens of them, being paid handsomely by North Korea in the 90s even, some $10,000 a month, to work in North Korea to help North Korea's missile programs. We fear that the two nations will resume this kind of close military cooperation. And if Putin visits North Korea, I don't know when, but probably sometime this year, we know that Putin was the first ever top Russian or former Soviet leader to visit North Korea. No other Soviet leader did, and Putin made this visit with Kim Jong-un in July 2000, right after the sensational first ever inter-Korean summit in mid-June. When Putin visits, I fear the two leaders might sign even a mutual pact, an alliance agreement, which fell apart in the wake of the collapse of the Soviet Union, but we know Kim Il-sung signed a military alliance treaty with the Soviet Union in 1961, as well as with China the same month. So from Washington's point of view, all these developments going on simultaneously with disasters in other parts of the world are very concerning. And I think Kim Jong-un is really poised to exploit, to take advantage of such expansive security threats, concerns to Washington.
Well, thank you very much. Professor Sung-Yoon has kindly agreed to stay for a few more minutes to autograph signed books for those who might still be ready to purchase copies of the sister. Let me thank all of you for joining us today. Professor Lee, it's been an extraordinary treat. Thank you very much. It's a fantastic book. It's always great to hear from you, and thank you for honoring us with your presence here at the Doc Orphan
Thank you.
House.
The honor is all mine. Thank you very much. Thank you.